Well, everyone, it is my pleasure, on behalf of all the organizers this year, to welcome you to the 2022 Viz workshop for Visualization for Social Good. Woo! I'm Leilani Battle, by the way. Maybe I should mention that. So, maybe I don't have to tell everyone in the room this, but you might be wondering, how did this workshop come to be? Well, we realized years ago that even though we know that visualization plays a pivotal role in not just sparking conversations about data and its impact on society, but also how it shapes narratives and convinces and changes minds. But we didn't see that those implications being investigated at the forefront, of visualization discussions, so we wanted to provide a venue for that. So to that end, over the past few years, my co-organizers and I have been building towards having a workshop presence at Viz, starting with a tutorial that we had at 2019, which was very successful, and people were so excited that we followed that up with a panel in 2020, a virtual panel, culminating in a workshop that started last year, where the objectives of the Vis4Good workshop are to provide a space for constructive feedback and discussion around emergent or ongoing work, and to build cohorts between practitioners, researchers, and experts working on crucial problems with real-world impact. So last year, we had a lot of amazing speakers. We had 5 papers and 4 lightning talks. And building on the success of last year, we bring the program that you're going to see today, with our theme for this year being pedagogy, process, and protest. So with the help of my fellow co-chairs for 2022, as well as our steering committee and our program committee, we have, hopefully, I believe, an exciting program for you today, with 2 paper sessions and a breakout session, and then closing remarks. And we have 7 papers and a poster paper that will be presented this year. So just as a reminder for opportunities for virtual engagement, so we'll be doing Q&A through Slido, and the link is here. And then we'll also be having online discussion available through Discord with a link here. And I'll share a link to these slides in the Discord so everyone has access. And just as a reminder for the live speakers, the talks are 7 minutes with 2 minutes of Q&A, and we'll help you out to make sure that we can stay on track. We're gonna build on the experiences of our fellow workshop organizers today and do our best to stay on track. So one of the organizers will be keeping track for you as you're presenting, and they'll give you a 2-minute warning, a 1-minute warning, and a wrap-up warning. And we will stand up when your time is up so that you know when it's time to switch over to the next presentation. And then if you haven't had a chance yet, we would love to have you engage with us on social media. For example, when you have time, just give us a shout out on Twitter. So without further ado, I don't want to keep from hearing these exciting talks. Again, here's the program. We're going to start with our paper sessions with our live presenters.
Our first speaker is John Schwabish, presenting additional perspectives on data equality.
Now that my time is starting before I'm set up, Lane. Alani's gonna shut me down. I don't know, am I waiting for a click, a thumb? What am I waiting for, Lane? I'm good to go? All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. So my name is John Schwabish. I am not an academic, like many of the folks in this room, and I'm not trained in computer science. My background is in economics, and I work for a nonprofit research institution based in DC called the Urban Institute. And a couple of weeks ago, we released a new report that builds off some previous work that I've done on how to take a more equitable and inclusive approach to working with collecting and visualizing data. So what I want to do is sort of present to you the major themes in this particular new report. And I'm going to encourage you to take a look at it. And we have several more reports coming out in the next several months. So here are the 4 main themes as I pull them out of this particular work. And for those of us who are doing research, these, I think, are the things that we need to be thinking about more and more intently and more strategically to be more equitable, being more inclusive in our work. First thing we need to do is we need to create a two-way street between researchers and the community. And I'm going to bring this together with computer science and specifically in a little bit. We need to build data systems and infrastructures that are more representative and more inclusive, particularly of underrepresented groups. We need to help develop trust between communities and researchers. And finally, we need to generate community summaries and visualization and communication products that these communities and people that we're focusing on can actually use, as opposed to burying our results in academic papers and journals that we were just talking about are behind firewalls and inaccessible to lots of other folks. So I'm going to talk about each of these very quickly. So how do we create, or what is important about creating a two-way street between researchers and the community? For far too long, and I'm particularly talking about the US context here, too many communities feel like researchers come to them, extract some information, extract some data, and then leave without actionable solutions. And we talk about 3 specific events or research projects in the report, and unfortunately there are countless others. And I'm just going to talk very quickly about the Barrow alcohol study of 1979. There is an Alaskan Native tribe, obviously in Alaska. They were concerned about alcoholism in their particular Native population, whether it was genetic, what were the societal and cultural factors that were driving alcoholism. So they reached out to a research team to come into their tribal area and help them better understand what was happening in their community. And what happened was the researchers came in, did all this research, and the next thing that the nation found out was a news report in the New York Times. That's how they found about the results of the study. And the news report was basically couched as a failure among the members of this community, right? And that's not actionable, that's not helpful, and that's not serving the needs of these underserved communities. So there's countless examples of this, in particular, underserved and communities and communities of color, that are essentially being taken advantage of by researchers. The second part, and this really comes through in the chapter on Native populations across the United States, is building representative data systems and infrastructure. That there are far too many data systems, in particular from the US government, that fail to meet the needs and fail to be representative of different communities around the country. And so you can see here, these are just some of the examples of things that we are finding that we explore in the paper. And I think this has been, at least recently, this is really pronounced in the COVID pandemic, where Native American populations were decimated by COVID, and yet the undercounts in many of our federal representative data sets simply did not capture the experiences of these Native populations. And so if we don't have that information, how can we serve these populations, and how can we improve public policy and in particular health policy? There's a whole section in this report on community-based participation research. And I know many of you are in computer science and you're thinking about all this saying, I don't really do any of this, I don't really need to do any of this. I am gonna pull this back together in just a moment, so I want you to keep this in mind. But there is several principles and models and theories about how to do better as the perspective of researchers, how to actually engage and work with communities. And in particular, what we need to do is start building trust. And the way that we can do that is learn and understand the history of the communities that we are working with and that we're focusing on, to understand their perspectives and their lived experiences. Another thing that we can do is actually join community-facing research meetings and actually interact with the community where they live. We can increase our capacity to better understand these communities. And we can acknowledge that this sort of work, that this qualitative-based work, is going to take time. As I mentioned earlier, I'm an economist. I took zero, or was required to take 0 qualitative methods courses in graduate school. Every person that I know who is primarily a qualitative researcher has had to take at least some quantitative methods trainings. So there is I would say, a fundamental failure, at least in economics, I'm guessing in many other sciences as well. There's a fundamental failure in being able to provide both types of research methods. This is, we had a team from Hawaii write one of our essays in this particular in this particular report, talking about this research hui in Hawaii, where the community that was inviting researchers into their community actually worked hand in hand with the researchers. And for me, just personally, what I found really, really interesting about this particular experience was the importance of food. That in this particular Hawaiian community, food is very important. It's very important in ways in which they culturally work together, and the ways in which they work with the researchers. And so one of the recommendations from our team from Hawaii was that the researchers need to provide food, and they need to bring food when they're working with the community, right? Again, it's better understanding how communities work. Finally, at least for these overarching pieces, is generating community summaries and communication products. And I think this is where particular folks at this conference can really help researchers in different fields. What we need to do is use a more active voice and jargon-free explanations. We need to use visual cues and color and graphics to draw attention to the main message. And we need to explore the ways communities actually use these different findings. I can't tell you how many groups and communities I've spoken with where the researchers provide a translation into a language that they do not speak, right? That we always go from English to Spanish. Not every person of color, not every person from outside the United States speaks Spanish. And then finally, what I tell all of my students all the time, no matter what I'm talking about, is to know your audience. Okay, so what does this mean for all of us at a computer science conference? And I have spoken to, this has been going on now for what, like 5 hours? I've already spoken to numerous people about the importance of doing qualitative research, the importance of recognizing and understanding your audience when you bring folks into your lab, when you ask people to work with you to better understand how they work together. Lonnie's yelling at me already, so I'm just gonna say, this work is in thanks to many different people, different groups around the country. Whoop. And I will just, so I will sum up so I don't get in trouble. So thank you very much, appreciate it.
What's that? Oh, yeah. All right. So we have a student volunteer at the back, Elsie. Elsie has a mic, and if anyone has questions for John, now is your time. I will also be monitoring Slido. Anyone?
I guess I'll ask Matt Kay, Northwestern University. I'll ask the question I just wrote in Slido, so you don't have to read it. How do we push like researchers or ourselves or whatever to actually give back to or to better engage in communities when the broader academic system is kind of a vast pile of garbage that gives us no incentives to do so?
So we were just talking about this very issue when it comes to open data, right? So these are all similar problems in the academic structures of the incentives, right? So I recognize that things that we all may want to do in this world don't necessarily help folks in this room get jobs or get tenure. What I have found, the successful piece, is to build these parts, these community engaged methods into your research at the very beginning so that it becomes part of the research process, so that when you are proposing your work, you are not at the end saying, oh, we need to talk to different communities. Oh, we need to add a layer of accessibility. We forgot to do that. It needs to be built in at the very beginning. So that way, Matt, to your point, it's not just we have a project and then we do these other things at the end. It's actually embedded within the project itself. So for those of you who are at the Digital Humanities talk this morning about accessibility, that's something that needs to start from the very beginning. You don't just say at the end, oh, we need to make this screen reader accessible. We need to make sure we add alt text at the very end. It's part of the entire process, and it's built into the budget, right? And it's built into the entire project so that when you say, I'm gonna work with a community in this particular project, I need the budget to provide compensation for the folks that we are interviewing, for the folks that we are talking with, because it's another thing that we have found time and time again, and I see lots of people nodding, that we know that people are not compensated for their time. We know they're not compensated for their efforts, and they're not compensated for their expertise, and we, I would say, all research fields need to do a much better job of recognizing that and respecting that.
Excellent, thank you. Timekeeper, do we have time for more questions? All right, we have another question here from Slido, so I'll ask it. How do we gain trust of orthodox communities which do not necessarily believe in the power of science and are thus holding back potential society-level progress?
This Slido person asks a lot of good questions. I'm not sure I have a great answer to that. I actually don't have an answer to that. I will just say I'm going to Tulsa on Wednesday to do a workshop for a client. And I have some slides in my deck that are showing graphics on abortion that are misleading. And my wife warned me not to actually show those graphs because I'm in Oklahoma. And the reaction I might get in Oklahoma may be very different than I get in Northern Virginia. So there are lots of different experiences around the world, around the country, and I don't know how we're going to be able to, that's a big question I can't answer. So I think just in general, we as a society and culture just need to try to be more respectful of people with different ideas and opinions, but I don't think that answers Slido's question.
Slido says great answer. Another one from Slido. Oh, we're out of time. Okay, thanks, John. There are questions online.
Okay, while we're transitioning to the second speaker, I'll introduce the speaker and paper. Please forgive me if I'm wrong with the pronunciation. I'll do my best. So next we have Lonnie Bezenson presenting Exploring and Explaining Climate Change, Exploration as a Visualization Pedagogy for Societal Action. Please get started.
All right, seems to be working. Maybe I should take that. Can everyone hear me on online, or should I take the mic? There was some problem this morning. Maybe I'll just take the mic. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and to present today. I work with Linköping University and the Norrköping Visualization Center. The work results from the collaboration of many, many people. Not all photos are up to date, as you can see. From Linköping University, the Norrköping Visualization Center, University of Utah, and Chalmers University. So the idea behind this work originates from the work that was conducted early on at the Visualization Center in Sweden, Norrköping, Sweden, that proposed to let visitors interact with real scientific data directly in an interactive system, much like the ones that experts actually use, and then guide them through some targeted explanations so that they could make their own discoveries. The concept that has been then successfully implemented on different kind of scientific concepts such as space or medical exploration in scientific centers. So extending on kind of the principles in these examples, Anders Schinnemann and his colleagues coined the term explorination to describe this new science communication paradigm. So essentially, explorination is at the intersection of three domains. On the one hand, data visualization, which when made interactive proposes exploratory visualization tools for experts to analyze their data, and when the principles of science communication and pedagogy are combined with interactive tools or data visualizations, we usually obtain explanatory visualizations that aim at describing or explaining phenomena or data to a lay audience. Explorination then proposed to combine explanatory and exploratory visualizations into a single system that can be used by experts and browsed by the public alike. The pedagogical benefits of explorination rely on the direct exploration of real visualized scientific data to allow for self-generated explanation of the communicated concept. This allows the public to construct an understanding of an abstract scientific phenomenon. And so these explorinative tools have been used in Visualization Center before to explore molecular biology, to explore medical science, but we thought that they could also be used to address the more than ever pressing matter of climate change. So the overall awareness of the immediacy of climate change now has risen, there's no doubt, but many people still do not consider it an existential crisis that will have significant implications for themselves and their society. So the behavioral responses to the crisis are still very, very far from the kind of urgency that is needed to address and catalyze more action. Yet most of the research on communicating about climate change is actually about direct response to messaging that is given to people or support of specific policies. And there's no real research that's been done on the potential of interactive systems to communicate about climate change. So we aim to fill in this gap with two explorative exhibits that we constructed. The first one that you can see here, the globe, is an interactive sphere-shaped displays that allows visitors to switch between three main content types that comprises of Earth cycles, climate models, and climate stories. The first content type mainly focuses on Earth cycles and allows users to explore and understand Earth cycles and directly measure data to start generating some hypotheses about the influence and impact of climate change. The second content type proposes to explore climate models that are based on the shared socioeconomic pathways, SSPs, which have been used in the past to help produce, for instance, the IPCC 6th Assessment Report. They essentially provide narratives that describe different socioeconomic development based on different paths that humanity could take forward, from the very, very green ones to the less sustainable ones. So using the globe, visitors can explore the results of different SSP scenarios. And the last one allows users to experience climate stories, which are short animations explaining the ozone recovery cycle, for instance, of the evolution of extreme weather and its consequences. So in short, this installation proposes 3 different levels of data abstractions and 3 different levels of guidance or interaction to users to understand climate and climate change. But recent research has also actually shown that to see the impact of their action, people needed to be able to relate to climate change at their own scale so that they could actually take actions based on it. And because the global food system is directly responsible for crossing sovereign boundaries that we've had on the planet, we propose here to actually explore food through Food on the Table that you can see here, which allows visitors to interactively explore the impact of several meal options on land use, water consumption, and carbon dioxide equivalent. So the system offers some guidance and prompts to help the generation of questions or queries that people might have, but users are actually free to explore themselves all the data that and you can see here the impact of beef and coffee, which is probably very important for most of us that are going to drink a lot of coffee during the conference, by the way. So we have not yet evaluated these exhibits at all with our visitors, but we hope to derive interesting data on 3 main research questions. The first one is, what is the impact of having different levels of scaffolding and guidance when communicating about climate change? These 2 exhibits will propose different levels of guidance to users so we can actually try to see what impacts it has on them and their understanding. The second one is, how does audience segmentation happen when communicating about climate change in a public center with interactive exhibits? Audience segmentation is very, very studied in science around science centers and all these things, but never really with interactive systems like this one. So this is something that we want to try to study as well. And third, we want to try to see if explorative exhibits, like the one that we built, could support intergenerational learning from parent to child, but also from child to parent. Because children are very likely less politically oriented than their parents, they might be more susceptible to adopting mitigating actions. But how can interactive exhibits like this one then help them convince their parents, who are more likely than to have a direct impact on climate change, remains to be studied. So yeah, we really hope that this project brings forward both interesting findings on the use of exploration to communicate about climate change, but also starts generating more mitigating action from the public. Thanks a lot for your attention.
All right, time for questions on Explore Nation. All right, I'll kick us off. It occurred to me, looking at these visualizations, to what extent are they kind of like based on best practices in visualization, like use this color or that color, or sort of like artistic or aesthetic impressions as communicated, to kind of get at the gist of it?
They're often based, so in the case of climate change it might be different, but they're often based on what experts actually use. So it might not always follow best practices. I think if you look at some visualization papers looking at what experts actually want to have in the end, it's not always following what we could say are best practices in visualization. But in the end, most of the systems that we have are also used by experts. So we don't always follow best practices. I mean, beyond the obvious, right? But yeah.
Thanks. Oh, goodness. Now Slido is very active. So let's go in order. Based on the last talk, how are you planning to engage the public and specifically build trust?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Yeah, I'm not sure I can actually give a proper answer to that. I mean, our hope with this is that somehow, because we give people access to the data that experts use, it should help build some trust in the fact that people are actually seeing whatever experts are seeing. But how that actually translates for real is very complicated. And we've seen with COVID, actually, that even when faced with what experts are actually looking at, people might still distrust it. So it's complicated, and it's very politically charged as well, so it's really difficult to answer.
Great.
One thing I'm wondering about, especially in the US, is that for a lot of the people who might need this most, they may not be the same audience who's coming to the kinds of places that would have these interactive exhibits. So how do we kind of widen our reach to engage with other people as well?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that's a little bit difficult. So the Visualization Center in Norrköping is probably a particular case because lots of schools get there. So I guess most of the kids around town have probably been there. But this is actually a very tough thing. That being said, there's some evidence that science centers / museums are actually giving access very often to populations that are underprivileged to some form of knowledge that they might not get through school, because getting to school might be difficult in some cases beyond the obvious high school level, let's say. But yeah, it's tricky, I agree, and it will have to do a lot with like making also probably this content available online in some form in the future as well, which would help, because it's true, you can't expect that everyone would just go to a science center or to a museum. I think my time is probably up. No.
40
Okay.
seconds. All right, a quick one. What's your thought about the museum as a place to put a system on the impact of food? Why a museum?
Why not? There's lots of kids getting there. If I don't know, there's really lots of kids getting there. Lots of people as well. The museum is really visited. You could always try to reach out to them in other ways, but I think it's unlikely that people actually bother beyond their exploration of the museum, looking at a system that would give them access to data, and just giving them data doesn't seem to make a change, right? We've known for years that adopting a more plant-based oriented diet is one of the ways to help with climate change, yet things are barely changing. So just knowing is not enough. Try to make it short, yeah.
All right, let's thank our speaker.
Awesome. Next up, we have Morgan Koval presenting on envisioning situated visualization of environmental footprint in an urban environment.
Hi. So I'm Morgan Koval, and I will present a work that is a collaboration between many people for the Amber project. So what surrounds us is a great source of information. What road we take, what building we pass by, what food is available in this new restaurant. Data is everywhere. And there are lots of things that we can do with it. With a growing concern for the environment all over the globe, wondering how our way of life, our decisions, our action, those of our governments, have an ecological impact is only natural. As visualization researchers and students, we are interested in exploring different ways to visualize environmental footprints, and an urban environment offers lots of opportunities for such visualization to be displayed and seen by a diverse crowd. But what are those opportunities, and how can they be made available for everyone to see? So we conducted a day-long workshop in the city of Bordeaux, in France, that was divided into two parts. In the morning, we wandered around the streets looking for potential spots, items, objects that could inspire us to design a visualization, taking into account what information could be visualized in relation to what topic and where it could be displayed. In the afternoon, we gathered all of the pictures we took and drew on them to define and clarify our ideas. We collected 67 designs that we attempted to group and categorize. We first tried to group according to data and data reference, but we realized that the two are closely related in some cases and much more abstract in others. Data and reference roughly correspond to the who, what, and where questions, and what those are certainly important to consider that now results in an insightful classification. So we decided to classify according to why and how instead. Why refers to the purposes of the situated visualizations, while how involves the mechanism with which the situated visualizations try to achieve their goals of aiding the environment. Starting with the purposes, we could identify 4 different subcategories. The first one addresses the need to facilitate eco-friendly behaviors. It includes situated visualization showing information to help locate infrastructure, such as trash cans or public transportation stops, or to help compare the energy efficiency of public transport with individual transport options. The second one aims at informing purchasing decisions. The designs also facilitate eco-friendly behaviors, but in a more specific way, because it involves stores, products, or items that can be bought and thus decision-making. Concrete examples include showing visualizations of the CO2 footprints of products visible in store windows or on billboards, or how long specific items are expected to last. The third one focuses on increasing general environmental awareness. The difference is that, in contrast to the other two categories, this one does not aim to support immediate decision-making, but rather help viewers become better educated about environmental data and get a better sense of the orders of magnitudes involved. For instance, some visualizations in that category showed how much CO2 is stored in a specific tree or how much it can capture over a year. Similarly, this visualization depicts the different types of animals that benefit from a given tree. The fourth and last subcategory of the purposes regroups situated visualizations meant to increase social awareness. It has an educational aspect which is similar to the previous category, but with a focus on people. Examples include visualizations that show how much garbage was produced in each building, but also how many pedestrians versus how many cars followed a given route or passed on a given street. Of course, some designs can fill multiple purposes. For example, this visualization shows wasted energy from a delivery van that was left running in the street. It raises awareness for the passers-by, but can also facilitate an eco-friendly behavior from the driver that sees the unnecessary pollution that is being added to the air. And even though we chose to classify these different purposes, it is a positive prospect that some visualizations can address different aspects at the same time. Moving on to the visualization mechanism, or the how, we were able to identify once again 4 subcategories. So the first one involves data comparison, which can either have viewers compare different options, places, or objects to others, and thus inform on concerning questions such as whether buying local is better, for example. Or else compare data about a data referent or historical or related dates. For instance, it could be a visualization that compares local population data in order to better evaluate the effect of a change of policies. This mechanism was used for different purposes, namely to inform and help make decisions and to promote eco-friendly behavior. The second mechanism we identify involves surface information, which is by default often hidden. That is data that cannot easily be inferred or extracted while in situ. For example, how much water was needed to grow certain products available in a store is data that is typically unavailable when making a purchasing decision. Similarly, thermal imaging displayed on top of a building's facade could convey how good the insulation is, and thus how eco-friendly a building is, which is not something that is straightforward when looking at a structure. Third mechanism aims to enhance footprints and make them concrete. It is closely related to the previous one, for they both involve data that are not directly visible, but in this particular subcategory, some visualizations focus on enhancing data that could be experienced or inferred to a limited degree while in situ. For example, these visualizations broadly concern air quality, which is usually invisible, but could be sensed. Similarly, while electricity usage can be observed directly while walking under a street light, for example, embedded visualizations could reveal how much energy is currently used to light one's path. The last mechanism answers the need to externalize personal knowledge for others. For example, situated visualizations in a dollar store represented people's experience with the longevity of the offered product. Examples like this one illustrate that some of the ideas are now compatible with the business interests of those who try to sell their goods and rely more on knowledge sharing between individuals. Additionally, to allow different passers-by to partake in this communal visualization, annotations could be used. Everyone could add information that could be openly displayed or hidden in a way through the use of AR graffiti. For instance, we also envisioned an interactive board on which everyone could draw items in a trash can, and environmental footprints could then be computed and visualized. In this case, we will learn from each other's ideas. During this ideation exercise, we did not limit ourselves with feasibility. As a matter of fact, our goal was not to think about what it would require for this visualization to see the light of day, but in the future, it will be essential to take into account the data that is needed, because it can trigger some privacy issues, but also what technology, what device should be used for each design, and can they be safely put in an urban area. Furthermore, the use of new technologies might have a negative impact on the environment. This is something that we ought to consider when developing new visualizations to be integrated in our world. Thank you.
All right, Slido's fill it up. Audience gets first dibs. You're part of the audience, sure.
Okay, so very interesting topic, very interesting talk. I'm wondering, do you have any advice for us as this community thinking about implications and ramifications of situated awareness on like political and economic, consequences that bringing those visualization might have?
I'm not sure I understood fully the full question. I just heard the word politics, and I think this is a...
What are the impacts of those situated visualization on like political or economic decisions? For example, you're showing information about different products and it changes the market, how people are buying stuff, and how it impacts business owners as well. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or ideas around how this community should also think about those consequences.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer this even though I'm not sure it was your question. But when we talk about the environment, it is always politics involved. We cannot divide the two of them. But we don't really care whether we're right-wing, left-wing. It doesn't matter. The important thing is to display enough environmental data so that people can talk about it. So it doesn't matter how people perceive it as long as it triggers something. I'm not sure it was the question, though.
It's a good goal. So we have a couple of questions online. Let's see. What technology could be used to make these situated visualizations a reality? And follow up, how accessible would they be to the general public?
Well, the accessibility depends on many different things, and it depends on the technology we use. And it depends also if we're talking about the future, like the tomorrow, or if we're talking about in 10 years. For now, I think we could use, and it wouldn't really be efficient, but we could have, AR glasses, headsets, for example. But we could also just use billboards. It depends on what we have at hand and what we can use. And as I said, can we put such things in an urban area without them being destroyed, for example?
Gotcha. We still good? So another question, how would you balance the tension between providing data and privacy?
Well, so this is a question that we did not really ask ourselves while doing this. But we always have to respect privacy. So if someone doesn't want to share their data, then they don't have to. But it doesn't always have to be personal. It can be about a community, so it can be anonymized. And it can also be about, for example, buildings, and then it doesn't really concern anybody. So there's always a way to deal with data.
Gotcha, great. That's time. Okay, well, I do want to say there are other questions on Slido, and I think those are being copied over to Discord. So let's thank our speaker one more time.
Excellent, thanks. Our next speaker is Douglas Marquand, and presenting on Can Data Visualization Change Minds? Identifying mechanisms of collaborative thinking and persuasion.
Okay, hi everyone. So you probably all will agree that data visualizations have a really important role in communicating science to ensure that people have a common understanding of a range of pressing social issues. But there often seems to be a kind of confounding gap between the reach of data visualizations and their impact. So this was really brought home for me during the COVID-19 pandemic, where data visualizations became part of the everyday discourse about where the pandemic was headed and the kinds of risks that we all faced, different kinds of the effectiveness of different mitigation measures. So we had this amazing access to near real-time data as the pandemic unfolded. And this might have led you to think that we'd be really well prepared to respond to the pandemic, but it didn't quite turn out that way, at least not here in the US. As we're all probably painfully aware, public beliefs and attitudes about the pandemic have been extremely polarized. And so despite all this data, it often seemed that people can't even arrive at a common understanding of the risks that we're facing and mitigation measures we should be using. So there's a real need to understand how we overcome these challenges when the next crisis comes along. How do we communicate scientific evidence to diverse audiences in ways that are persuasive, especially for people whose existing views might conflict with the data? If we want to understand the persuasive power of data, it's important to first define what we mean by persuasion. In psychological theories of persuasion, there's an important distinction between changes in beliefs and changes in attitudes. So beliefs concern your agreement with specific facts about the world, and they can often be validated or invalidated by external evidence or some experience. So for example, you might have a belief that vaccines are associated with higher rates of death, and based on the data visualization that you see in a news article, for example, you might be persuaded that your belief was invalid and change it as a result. And of course, you might have some other beliefs about how vaccination is related to other outcomes, which might also change when you see relevant data. Unlike beliefs, attitudes are overall evaluations about entities. So you might be either pro-vaccination or anti-vaccination or somewhere in between. And while attitudes are informed by those specific beliefs, they're not just the product of them. So attitudes are also linked to emotions and aspects of personal and social identity. They're linked to other kind of larger beliefs that form your worldview. So changing specific beliefs, for example, by correcting misconceptions that vaccines cause illness, may not have much of an impact on your broader attitudes that are part of that motivational context. So visualizations that are used in persuasive contexts are often really concerned with the problem of changing specific beliefs. There's really not enough understanding of how broader attitudes impact how people interact with visualizations, and what kinds of visualizations are more likely to lead to long-lasting changes in attitudes and behavior. In the paper, we summarize a recent study that we did trying to look at this interaction between attitudes and beliefs. We conducted a study where we measured people's pre-existing attitudes about two topics, COVID vaccination and labor union membership. And then we also measured their changes in beliefs when we presented them with data sets relevant to each of those topics, which are shown on the right. I'm just going to quickly highlight two findings from the study. If you want the details, please take a look at the paper. The first is that global attitudes had an effect on whether people learned from these visualizations. So people who had strong anti-vaccination attitudes were less inclined to change their beliefs about those specific relationships when they saw the data. But more importantly, for the present purposes, we found very little evidence of changes in attitudes. So even though the data that we presented was generally pretty favorable about vaccination, we didn't find that people became more supportive of vaccination as a result of seeing it. So this really speaks to the difficulty of changing strongly held attitudes, even when people might be willing to update their beliefs about specific empirical patterns. So this led us to start thinking about, well, how might we change data visualizations to be more persuasive? How might we change not just beliefs about specific patterns, but also drive these changes in broader attitudes? Theories of persuasion suggest that lasting attitude change arises when people engage in elaborative processing of the message content. So people can't rely on intuition or heuristics to process a message, for example, by deciding to just ignore data because it comes from a source that they don't agree with, like a politically polarized source. Instead, they have to engage with the content of the message and process it in terms of its deeper meaning, think about what it implies for their understanding of the world and their attitude. So what kinds of visualizations might promote this sort of elaborative thinking? In the paper, we focused on three elements that seem especially promising and are motivated by related research in cognitive science. Those are agency, so allowing people to control the pacing of information, giving them the opportunity to explore and ask questions. The second one is self-explanation, prompting them to, after they've seen some data, to interpret it and consider its broader implications. This especially encourages a focus on underlying causal mechanisms. And the last is belief elicitation, so encouraging people to activate relevant knowledge and use it to generate predictions. So it seems to me, at least, that the way the data is often presented in persuasive communication doesn't really seem all that conducive to this kind of elaborative thinking. So they often have prominent source cues, which often have a kind of partisan signals, or partisan identity. People also might see a persuasive message or framing before they actually get to the data visualization. So especially for someone who doesn't already agree with the message, there's a good chance that they'll just make an intuitive judgment based on the source or the framing and never actually get to engage with the data itself. So in comparison to that kind of message on the left, where people might be especially likely to rely on intuition or heuristic judgments, a more effective message structure might be something like this one on the right. Starting with some kind of a belief elicitation where you encourage people to activate their own knowledge about the topic, followed by some interactive, explorable data, where they have the opportunity to interrogate aspects of the data that they find interesting or surprising, compare it to their own expectations, followed by the opportunity to explain what they learned or otherwise articulate the meaning of the data. And then lastly, this might be followed by a final persuasive message that's grounded in the data that they just had direct experience with. So in the future, one thing we're interested in doing is testing these kinds of messages which might promote elaborative thinking to evaluate whether or not they increase the power of the persuasive power of data visualizations, especially among polarized audiences that come to them with very different views. Okay, thank you.
All right, the audience is here.
Hi, this is Hannah speaking. So I really loved the layout you had for what you recommended we share for people. But considering how much social media plays a very big factor into how misinformation and how things are spread, and also how a lot of people interact with these visualizations or they find them on social media sites like Twitter or
how can we integrate this into existing social media platforms, for example, which will look a lot more like the one on the left? Like I'm a Twitter user, right? So I'm modeling that off of what I usually see on Twitter. I think that this involves some technological change or additional technological tools to kind of create these capacities. I will say that some instances of this have started to appear, not on Twitter, but for example, let me just show this example from the New York Times since I have it here. This is an example that shows, that relies a lot on belief elicitation, where it doesn't start with a persuasive message, it just kind of raises a question about your beliefs about the causes of deaths in recent years, and it asks you to, it elicits your beliefs about how you think this trajectory has played out for different causes. So this is something that I think you were seeing more and more in other platforms like in data journalism, but it hasn't yet appeared, to my knowledge at least, in Twitter and the kind of most common ways that these kinds of things are shared. Yeah.
Let me ask one online and then come back in person. You talked about engaging people with the belief elicitation. How might that relate to ideas of engaging people with explanations from the previous talk?
Yeah, I think these are very related. Yeah, I think a lot of what you saw in the previous talk about exploration, there are a lot of these same elements that are at play there, right? So here I'm kind of presenting in this discrete way. I'm a psychologist, so I tend to think of, information processing models of the mind, right? But I think that especially in those kinds of immersive contexts, there's this kind of constant interplay between the evidence, the experience, the data that you're exploring, the kinds of memories or knowledge that it's activating, the questions that it's causing to arise. So I think that these are very closely related. Yeah.
30 seconds, 20 seconds.
Okay, Ali Sarfat, UMass Amherst. So I'm just wondering, visualizations that you considered, was there any communication of uncertainty, and how would that impact the persuasion of changes in attitude and behavior and all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. It's something we've really talked about here, but we have been doing some work looking at the role of uncertainty visualizations and how that might impact the credibility of the information that you see, whether it's less persuasive. Since I'm out of time, we have a paper that I can share with people if you're interested that looks more specifically at that matter. Yeah. Okay, thank you all.
Well, perfect, thanks. Our next speaker is Priya Davka. Please forgive me for mispronunciation, and presenting on representing marginalized populations, challenges in anthropographics.
All right, and this is...
present our paper titled Representing Marginalized Populations, Challenges in Anthropographics. We'll start off with an introduction of anthropographics. We'll then describe critiques of 3 challenges in current anthropographic designs and provide examples of these challenges from data journalism and visualization research. Lastly, we close off with potential opportunities for more inclusive anthropographic design research. Anthropographics are human-shaped visualizations that have mostly been used within data journalism and visualization research to show data about people. This data has largely included demographic data, such as age, gender, and social class, among many others. However, demographic data is also closely linked to marginalization. This is because we tend to classify individuals into demographic categories based on their characteristics. And this problematic approach has been used to historically oppress and marginalize populations through systems such as racism and sexism. Most current anthropographics are also created by a small group of designers and researchers who might lack the background necessary to contextualize demographic data of the diverse populations being represented. As a result, most current anthropographics use simple human shapes and do not actually show the demographic differences between populations. And hence our critiques of the challenges involved in current anthropographic designs. Firstly, most anthropographics that use simple human shapes also tend to include homogeneous representations of marginalization. For example, in this large-scale donation allocation experiment, anthropographics are used to try to evoke empathy from viewers. Here, the researchers used the same generic human shapes to represent migrants from two different geographical locations and who died of vastly different causes. They also use a single design and a single skin tone for these different demographic groups, and do not show any identifiable detail between them, which might portray these populations as being interchangeable. Another recent example from data journalism that we critique is this visualization of individuals who died of the coronavirus in the US. This visualization uses simple human shapes to represent individuals and hides the important demographic differences, such as race, gender, and social class between them, that also likely influenced their exposure to the disease. These generic human shapes can possibly confound differences between people, such as differences in culture and lived experiences. This is especially important for marginalized populations, as these homogeneous human shapes can portray them as being interchangeable. The second critique we highlight is the use of marginalization as an inclusion criteria in previous anthropographic projects. The types of projects that marginalized populations are included in might be limited, depending on the type of data available and considering privacy and anonymity. Marginalized populations might also be overrepresented in projects about issues affecting them, such as conflicts, death, and suffering. This might result in projects that use a lens of victimhood to represent these populations, and also include graphic representations of suffering. For example, a quick search on the newspaper The Guardian's website for the African continent turns up data stories that include dehumanizing images of starvation, next to standard visualizations such as bar charts. The last critique we put forward focuses on contextualizing data sets about marginalization. A lot of the data about marginalized populations has to be understood within broader social, historical, and political contexts. Without this understanding, there is a risk that anthropographics might reinforce stereotypes or caricatures without sufficient context about the data and the populations being represented. This example shown here is a data physicalization about slave voyages, where the researchers used colored beads to represent enslaved people, the locations in Africa where they were captured from, and the locations they were taken to in the Americas. The researchers did not consult with domain experts before deciding what materials they would use for this project. But after completion, they were made aware that glass beads were also used to barter for enslaved people during the slave trade. This next example comes from the Associated Press and uses colors resembling skin tones to show the distribution of Afghan refugees and the US states where they will be resettled in. The Associated Press has used this color palette extensively before, but in this specific situation, the use of skin tone-like colors can reinforce racist stereotypes about immigrants, changing the demographic composition of US states to be less white. These choices can be perceived as being problematic and can reflect a lack of awareness of racial equity. Next, we highlight some opportunities for anthropographic research that we think might help in the creation of more equitable and inclusive human-shaped visualizations. We think anthropographics can be used to positively represent demographic differences between populations. One way could be to include marginalized populations in the design process of these anthropographics to avoid potentially harmful misrepresentations. We also think that anthropographics have the potential to be used in a variety of places. So far, these visualizations have largely been used to measure their effects in evoking empathy. But the human shape of anthropographics is interesting to represent demographic data, and this type of data is collected and used broadly, which increases the opportunities for designers and researchers to experiment with diverse designs. To close off, we think anthropographics is an exciting research area that offers the potential to create more equitable and inclusive representations of people. Please check out our paper, and if you have any questions or comments, we'd be glad to take them. Thank you for listening. We present our paper titled
Thumbs up, thumbs up. So questions for Priya and anthropographics. There, Priya, you're on screen now. So one up front.
Okay. Priya, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Great paper. Two questions for you. One is on the AP example. I'm curious what you think. If the AP has a data viz style guide where they're using those colors and they want to stick to their brand color, should they change it in those particular circumstances? And the second question would be, is your approach now not to use icons of people and use abstract shapes instead?
So to start off with the first question, I think in this specific instance, perhaps yes, changing the color palette would have been more helpful and a little bit more inclusive. But at the same time, I think it's a very difficult question, right? Because like skin color by itself doesn't have any like inherent meaning, but it can be understood as racist in this specific context. So I think it would have been interesting to have people from these populations involved, or if like the design team was like a little bit more diverse, they could have caught that possible implication beforehand. And then for the second question, this is something that we've been thinking about a lot, like how to actually have alternatives to simple human shapes instead of just using generic icons. And one of the main pitfalls of like, I think of our paper and of our critiques is that we don't really know how people perceive these like simple human shapes, right? Like we don't know if like there's a specific default demographic group that is associated with these shapes. We just generally don't have any like literature that says like how people react to these. So it would be interesting to have like more research in that area, and then seeing if actually having identifiable physical characteristics in these simple human icons actually make a big difference, or if they just are good to look at but don't really help people relate to these visualizations.
Time for one more? A quick one. Okay. Slido question. Would it be possible to create a Viz library or an inclusive Viz library of anthropographics?
Thank you for this question. I'm really excited for this one because I think, yes, I do think it would be a very big, large scale effort. But if we do include diverse populations in the creation of these anthropographics, I think it would be something that the Viz community could come together to put this together and start thinking about like how that could actually happen. And I think it's exciting in the context of visualization because we don't really have access to the populations that we represent. And this would be one of the ways where we could actually involve people in this design process. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank our speaker.
Awesome. Our final speaker before the break is Lorenzo Ambrosini. I just want to mention before we leave for a break that after the break we're doing a breakout session. We would love to engage you all in important real-world problems and how visualization can play a role. So Lorenzo's talking about Databricks Space Mission, teaching kids with data about data with physicalizations.
Hi, I hope you can all hear me. I'll share my screen. Just a second, sorry. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with the sharing.
Slides.
Okay, sorry about that. Hello, everyone. I'm Lorenzo from Linköping University, and today I'm going to present Databricks Space Mission, a project about supporting data literacy among primary school children by introducing them for the first time to the world of data through an entertaining experience. I'd like to start with a simple question. If I had to give you a bunch of Lego bricks, how would you use them to measure how many people are taking part in this workshop? Perhaps divided by home country, age group, profession, or any other social aspect. What features of the bricks would you use? How would you organize them? Well, I'm not going to tell you how to represent data with Lego bricks. I'm pretty sure that everyone here would come up with a unique and valid solution. I'm a designer, and I think my role is to facilitate the understanding of a complicated phenomenon to an expert eye. And with my research, I would like to make data more accessible to those who don't work with it every day or don't have sufficient education to understand its complexity and importance. What I'm interested in is to empower kids to understand their role in the world, both as data consumers and data producers. Our society is increasingly data-driven, and each individual produces information every day. So I think they need to be aware of the importance and presence of this data and that they represent something real and concrete. If I had to ask them to represent data with Lego bricks, as I did with you, I think they might find it challenging and would hardly know how to even define data. So the two key questions that motivated my research were, how might we design a tool that allows children to grasp the concept of data and its relevance in our everyday lives? And more specifically, what should we build? How should it work? What would make it appealing to kids? The Databricks Space Mission activity uses data physicalization to make the abstract concept of data more tangible, legible, and comprehensible. Data physicalization is defined as a physical artifact with geometry or material properties encode data. So taking advantage of tangible elements to translate data, it helps in the process of analyzing and reflecting on information because it allows for a greater interaction with it. Previous work in data physicalization has focused on workshops that allow individuals to design their own data representation and foster reflection and discussion on different subjects. This demonstrated that constructing physical visualization can be personal, varied, and enmeshed with participants' everyday lives and can encourage a broad range of personal reflection. However, most of them focused on expert adults and not on children. Those few projects that involve children indicated that data literacy can be about a process of democratization to allow youth to consider themselves as people capable of using data for multiple purposes and recognize their own data rights. In fact, very often data is collected on youths with preconceptions and biases and are rarely collected by and for youths. The Databricks Space mission builds on these compelling results of teaching kids about data and empowering them to be their own data producers, and does so by employing data physicalization. To complement our literature review, we conducted several interviews with local primary school teachers to learn more about the needs of teaching their students about data. We created an affinity diagram using the interview insights and the literature review to build a broad set of design needs for the project. The interviews revealed a lack of existing curriculum to educate children about data, but at the same time, that it might be introduced through engaging and empowering activities that are flexible to children's needs and abilities. The Databricks Space Mission Toolkit is a simplified version of a role-playing game, where the teacher acts as a facilitator and the Lego bricks are used by children both as props for the storytelling and as a material metaphor for data. It consists of a set of Lego bricks, a white base representing the clipboard on which to collect data, and a guide for the teachers to organize the activity. Miraya should be handed out or has already handed out printed copies of the guide there in person. Children are invited on a fictional adventure, a mission on a spaceship guided by their captain, the teacher, to start a conversation with aliens about our planet. The teacher's guide explains what the kit consists of and has a list of bullet points for the preparation and the conduction of the activity. They're asked to create the spaceship floor plan and translate it into the classroom desk setting. Each room corresponds to a desk to perform one task. For each task, a group of children has to collect data on the clipboard to answer a question, which may relate to different subjects or aspects of his environment in school. The teacher is supposed to think about it in advance to fit the activity within the different subjects' curricula. For example, if we're talking about geography, the task might be counting how many cities there are in each region to find out where they're located and in which region most people live. Or when it comes to math, it might be to see who's the tallest in the group and see the average height. After being assigned a task, the groups head out into the school environment to complete it with the help of Legos. Each group gets a toolkit with a set of bricks to record the observation, and the teacher explains to them how to use it to translate information. Data can be encoded through the 4 colors and the 3 sizes available in the kit, as well as the number of the bricks. Also, the white base has 3-dimensional space parameters, width, length, and height. The combination of these offers different possible qualitative and quantitative dimensions to represent data. During the game, there is no formal definition of data because children are supposed to experience on their own what data are and eventually get some help from teachers to understand what they've been working with. At the end of the activity, the teacher starts a conversation to make the students reflect with questions like, what do the bricks represent, or how did data help your mission? The goal is to let them learn something from the curriculum without even realizing it. They should understand that data can be about different things and are not only related to school. In the end, the mission may or may not be successful, depending on whether the data was properly collected, but the aim is to create a dialogue among the children to understand that they were working with data and eventually grasp the notion of data. This toolkit is an initial prototype designed from the insights from the literature and interviews, and we haven't had the opportunity yet to deploy it in an actual scenario with teachers and children. The next step for this research is to get feedback on the design. It will be interesting to see how it works in different environments. For example, with different educators or in other countries' education systems, it's more likely that new ideas and improvements will emerge. Also, a proper game design study should be carried out to better define both the Lego bricks set and the role-play settings. Thank you very much.
All right, I'll kick us off with a Slido question. Do you have feedback asking kids to create longer-term visualizations, for example, adding a brick every time they do an activity at school?
If I understood the question correctly, unfortunately, we didn't have the chance to start trying out with children, so we don't have yet a feedback from them. But hopefully the next research phase would be like that, to test it with children.
Gotcha, great. Anyone in here? Because Slido's popping. All right. What is the advantage of using physical bricks versus stacking virtual bricks in a computer game?
I think, and the research about physicalization proves it, that touching what represent data and build something can enhance the understanding of it. So getting it to build something from scratch and relate it to data, it can be more fruitful to understand what is it about. And especially in this situation where we're talking about kids, it's something that can relate easier. And I think it's an easier way to convey the notion of data.
And one more, your chance to make some money. Is Databricks Space Mission available to purchase?
No, unfortunately, but I mean, if any investor is interested, you can reach me out. We can talk about it. But no, right now it's not available for purchase.
That's great. Any other questions? Otherwise, let's thank our speaker. All right, and just one more reminder for you all. We do have a break. Viz has a break for the next 30 minutes. Vis4Good will continue after the break. We have one more paper presentation, also about bricks, a poster presentation, and then we want to design visualization for social good in the future. We're gonna have a breakout session. You're gonna go into groups. This is something that we call Vis4Good Classic. It's kind of what kicked off Vis4Good in the first place, which really got us to where we are now. And it's all thanks to you, the community. From the program, it was really an excellent program. It shows that you really care. So have a good break and see you soon.